Hey everybody, happy Father's Day to those who are fathers, and I'm going with that theme for today's video. So in the spirit of Father's Day, generally when you're born, the first person to see you other than the doctor is your father. I know it may not be the same case for everybody, but generally speaking, that's kind of how it goes. So since that is the first person you're generally introduced to, what I've decided to do is I've defined quite a few bands that I consider to be fathers in my journey through music, introducing me through different styles. So it's going to be like metal, some rock, and some punk in here as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So metal in general was kind of the same band that got me into one specific style, so I didn't really pick like just a heavy metal choice for that. But I think, you know, a majority of people would say that Black Sabbath are the fathers of metal. And I understand that, you know, people will say, well, there was Led Zeppelin at the time, Deep Purple at the time, even Cream to some extent at the time. But none of them were doing what Sabbath did. They didn't have the tone Sabbath had. They didn't have the heaviness that Sabbath had. And I think, especially with Ozzy's vocal style, especially on the first album, being such a haunting sound, that I think that, to me, that lends them to being the fathers of heavy metal. So the first band that got me into metal and hard rock, secular music in general, I went with Metallica. They were the first band I ever heard doing this very heavy thing. This isn't the album, although it would be not long after I heard my first Metallica song that I would get a chance to get the early albums that they had at the time. So they were the band that got me into thrash as well. And within thrash, you also have a brand called crossover or crossover thrash, which is a blending of hardcore and thrash metal, and it's kind of marries the intensity of the two, generally more punky or hardcore vocals, and generally shorter song lengths. So the band that actually got me into that was DRI, and my introduction to DRI was the punk hardcore covers album from Slayer, Undisputed Attitude. And when I looked up the bands that were on this, and DRI was one of the bands, they had there was like a combination. They did Violent Pacification and another song combined, and I really liked that. And that got me into a lot of the other hardcore bands as well, like TSOL and DI, Verbal Abuse, those kind of bands. So they were my gateway into crossover. My father of power metal for me was Manowar. It wasn't this album. It was actually the Kings of Metal album. And I didn't realize that kind of was what that style was. I just kind of considered it kind of epic. And I guess you could probably consider it epic metal, power metal. It's kind of all the same thing in my opinion. But I was really drawn to Manowar. So for death metal, I have a father and a grandfather. So the grandfather band for me was Death when I bought this album on CD. And I had already had, I think at the time I already had 6 Feet Under's Maximum Violence. And I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it. And then when I bought this, I was really kind of blown away as, you know, what kind of sound is this? It's definitely not thrash, although it's very thrashy at times. It was very different. And I really didn't visit this album a whole lot It wasn't until I got into my downloading days and to when I discovered Cannibal Corpse. And that to me was like the beginning, really, for me to soak up and get into death metal kind of properly. Next is groove metal, and so a band that I think a lot of people think had their style is called a lot of different things. Some people think they were thrash, some groove. Their early records more of the glam area, but I got into them during their groove metal period, and that would be Pantera. A couple of videos on MTV, and then when I started being actually able to buy my own CDs and stuff, this was one of the first ones I bought. And from there we go into industrial metal, and I really didn't know much about that sound really until I discovered Ministry. A couple of videos on MTV here or there, and then something kind of piqued my interest to start. I think it was during when I was, like I said again, downloading, and found these guys and was just straight up blown away by their sound. Eventually other bands like Fear Factor would kind of get into that mold for me as well. Then we have doom metal, and it's this band, Candlemass. They introduced me to the epic doom metal genre in specific. But first time I heard them was on a TV radio station called Liquid Metal that was either on Dish Network or DirecTV. I don't remember which one. And first time I heard it was actually a medley that they did that I think was on the Ancient Dreams as a bonus track. It was a Black Sabbath medley that they did, and I was completely blown away by that sound. And next, alternative rock. And this band and many other kind of bands kind of get lumped into this category called alternative rock. Some are called grunge. And some of those bands I don't think fit that category. I think they were really more metal than they were anything else. And grunge, to me, really wasn't a style as more of it was like a look that the band members generally had. And they were usually coming out of the Pacific Northwest, like Washington or so ever. But so this next album isn't my favorite by them, but it is the one that got me into them. Nirvana's Nevermind. I remember when the videos for Lithium, Come As You Are, Smells Like Teen Spirit were on MTV like constantly. Getting a dubbed cassette of this. Still very much love this album, even though it isn't my favorite by them. But it was really, it was like the next kind of progression as far as mainstream heavy that I had heard at that point in time. And then I've got three in kind of the same category. The first punk band I got into, and still my favorite, is the Ramones. And I bought a like a best of compilation. It had like 30-something songs on there. I think it was like a volume 1, but I don't know if they ever had a volume 2 of it. And this was kind of like, this was my gateway into punk music. And then, so my gateway into hardcore punk, which is not exactly the same as hardcore, was the Misfits. And I got into them because of Metallica's Garage Inc. Covers album. And my first kind of memory of even knowing about the Misfits was actually a Saved by the Bell episode, where there was a kid that had a Misfits shirt on. I thought it was a pretty cool shirt. Didn't really think much of it after that. Looked up the bands that were on that covers album. Misfits were on there, and I liked those songs. And so at the time, I was actually on my first deployment, and they had a ship store, and they had all the kind of basic stuff you need, but they also had CDs. And if they didn't have it, you could order it. And so I was just kind of looking around at the stuff that you could order on the computer, and there was a Misfits box set. I don't remember what exactly it was called, but it was a 4 CD set, and it came in a tombstone, or excuse me, a coffin-shaped box, and it had a booklet, which I have the booklet somewhere. I've been since lost the Coffin box, but anyway, this is the band that, you know, got me into hardcore punk, horror punk. And then the band that actually got me into hardcore itself, even though some people say they have some crossover moments, and I think they kind of do, but they lean more towards the hardcore side, and that's the Cro-Mags. I remember listening to these guys, another band during my download days, and just going, oh, it's not metal and it's not punk. It's some kind of marriage of the two, and it had leaned more toward what I eventually would find out to be hardcore. Yeah, but these guys got me into that scene. And then finally, the band that kind of really got me into music, to where I would actually, the music style I would actually start listening to. They were actually a Christian band, and the band that first got me into Christian rock and metal and just kind of heavier music altogether is Petra. And it was, in fact, this album, as a matter of fact, that also got me into these guys. It'll eventually get me into bands like White Cross and White Heart and, you know, Striper, and eventually, you know, heavier bands and stuff like that. So those are the subgenre fathers for me. I think it'd be pretty interesting if anybody wants to do a response video to this. But anyway, hope you're having a great Father's Day, and God bless.